In this video we're going to talk about types in Ant. Types in Ant is different from types in Java. In Java, if you're creating a class file, then that means we're essentially creating a custom data type. But whereas in Ant, types just simply means set of tags, and each tag will have a certain responsibility. It's as simple as that. But then why are these called types? That's because each one of these tags that we're going to discuss now is associated with the Java class file behind the scenes, and so these are called types. Hope that makes sense. So let's move on. First let's talk about the class file set. But in order to use this, we need to first include set of libraries that this tag requires. This tag doesn't work without these libraries. These libraries are called Bytecode Engineering Library, or simply BCEL, and are provided by apache.org. So this is the link from where you can download that jar file. Well, you would actually get to download a zip file. You need to extract it, and then you get this folder inside which you'll find this jar file, BCL, whatever the version you download .jar. Just copy it into the lib directory of ant home. In my case, this is the path for me, and here's the lib directory. You don't have to include all the other jars that are here. You can just simply delete them. So now after you do that, you can start using these tags. So first let's talk about the class file set. For this purpose I've created this build file. Now this build file looks a little complex, but believe me, it's very easy to understand. I'll walk you through though. And since our XML files are getting a little complex, it's time to install a plugin like this, XML Tools, that will help us give proper formatting to our XML document. And the way you download it is going to this plugin manager, and then you'll be able to find that XML Tools plugin in here. Just select it and click install. You're good to go. And once you do that, even if you mess with XML file like this, you can just simply do Ctrl, Alt, Shift and letter B. That would bring proper indentation to your XML document so that it looks a little clean and neat, more readable, etc. So let's try to understand what's happening in here. Let's start with the default target, which is test and is dependent on the compile target. The compile target is in turn dependent on the clean target, which is the final target. But we'll talk about the clean target in a moment. Let's see what's happening inside the compile target. We're trying to compile a couple of Java files, which are these two Java files. And the test.java is actually dependent on hello-world.java. Let me show you what I mean. So here are the two files. Test.java is actually creating an object of hello world, which is this, and it has a simple method that displays a hello world message. After we instantiate it, we're just calling this method display message. But the point here is this test.java is actually dependent on hello world.java. And this Java task is compiling those two Java files. And in here we have provided the class path that points to the current directory. And the reason why we need to include this class path is because before we try to compile the test.java, we need to have the .class file of this hello world. Only then will this get compiled, because as I mentioned, test.java is dependent on this. So once we're done with this compile target, we would move on to test target, within which we're trying to create a jar file by including all the class files that we just generated. And for that, we're going to make use of this class file set type. Class file set is similar to a file set, but the difference is you don't have to mention all the list of files you want to include, but rather you just mention one root file. In our case it's test, the name of the class file, and this class file set is actually going to take care of including all the files that this class file is dependent on. That means this is also going to include the hello world class file that this test class is dependent on. As simple as that. Whereas if you use a file set, then you'd have to mention all the files all by yourself. Now actually we can just include this as part of the jar task itself. But as I've already mentioned, if you want to use it across multiple tasks, then you would take it out of the target, give it an identifier, and then reference to it using that identifier, just as we did here. So that's about the file set. That's what is described in here. Let's run our XML and see what's going to happen. So it has compiled those two files as well as built jar out of it. And if you go to the directory, we indeed have all those files. Let's see what's going on inside this jar file. And we should be able to see not just test.class file, but also the hello world. Open with WinRAR. And sure enough, we have those two files. Although we just mentioned only one file in our class path set tag. Coming to description tag, it will allow us to provide description to our project, and I've already put that in the same file. But in order to display this description, you need to provide the following argument. So let's copy it and try to see how it works. And here is the description. We also got pattern set tag. I've used this as well in our example. Here it is. Pretty simple. If you take a look at this file set, instead of me putting these two instructions in here as part of a file set, I created a pattern set that will help us specify a pattern using which we'll be able to identify a set of files. In our case, it's both .class file as well as the .jar file, and we made it part of this task delete and as part of a clean target. So that's basically going to delete the jar file and class files that are created, so that when we run the build file, the compile and test task will create new files for us. Pretty simple. Similarly, we also have file set. We've talked about it already. It will help us include a list of files based on a certain pattern. File list is similar to a file set, but the difference is it would allow you to include a specific file. And note that this time the tag is not include but rather file, and that points to a file. The dir set is actually more or less same as file set, except instead of including list of files, you would include list of directories. Or just as with file set, you can also use this tag exclude to exclude certain directories. In our case, we wanted to exclude all the directories that has the word test in it. And this is actually used in real world projects as well, because we don't want to include Java files that are part of unit testing like JUnit, Mockito, etc. They don't have any role during runtime of our application. We got multi-root file set as well, and that's actually a combination of these two, file set as well as dir set. So you can not only include set of directories, but also set of specific files, etc. The filter set is interesting. In fact, you have to use it with a little bit of care. It can easily mess things up. Basically, it can be part of any task that supports filter sets, an example of which can be seen here. What we're trying to do with this statement is we're trying to copy this particular file to another directory, but while copying, the filter will actually help us replace the occurrence of the word date with today's date. Similarly, you can have many more filters. So the text file will actually go through this filtering process line by line, and text will be replaced accordingly. This is just another example of filter set. All I've done here is I've taken out this out of a task, give it an identifier to reference it from the task. So both will accomplish same, but the difference is we can now refer to this filter set from here using using its identifier. Alright, that's pretty much it on types. See you soon.